Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Bipolar Lines, the podcast where two spouses talk about loving someone with bipolar disorder. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Laura.
And here we are. We're back.
We are. We're back.
What is this? Season 2, episode 3.
I think.
Yeah.
Yep, 3.
Awesome. How are you, Laura?
Well, I think the bigger question is, how are you?
I'm on the struggle bus, if you can hear it.
I know.
But I'm feeling better.
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
Ended up with the COVID.
Oh, no.
Yeah, took me down. But I'm feeling better. Now I just have all the sinus stuff, so that's always fun. Have you had COVID before?
Yeah, I had it once. But the biggest symptom for me was just being exhausted for 2 weeks after. I didn't get too much congestion with it, really. I was just very, very tired.
Ugh, I think that's one of the worst parts. For sure. Well, how is Cody?
Yeah, good. Actually, my whole family is out of town right now, camping. So I have the house to myself. Yes, it's been because I've cleaned and no one's redirtied it. I've gotten so much done. I love them, but it's been great too.
I love that.
I don't know, get my house under control.
Well, being able to just enjoy the clean environment. That's
fantastic.
That
too. Exactly.
It's like, let me just relax and look at all my beautiful work.
Exactly. How's Jeremy doing?
He is all right. He is still coming out of the depressive episode. This one's been a long time coming, had medication changes. And as a side note, which is even more frustrating, but he let me know a couple days ago that he'd been drinking heavily throughout the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah. That'll do it.
That'll definitely make it worse. And, this is something that he's battled for a long time, masking. He just wanted to feel better. And, he told me to my face, look, I know this doesn't help. I know that drinking is only going to make things worse. But it was like he just kept trying to find that feeling where he felt less.
Yeah.
And so he kept drinking.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I was getting sick, and I was just like, okay, thank you for sharing this with me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all I could say, because in that moment, logically he knew, but
right.
What can you say? I'm not his mom. I'm not gonna shame him. Just like, first of all, that makes a lot of sense. That it really does help me understand why things have been lasting so long. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. I should say we haven't seen progression in the right direction with the medication change and stuff like that. If that hadn't been part of the equation, I think we would have seen him moving out of it at a faster pace, I guess I should say.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
Who was I talking to? I can't remember, but it's really crazy that so Cody had a period of complete, he doesn't like this word, remission, but that's what they call it, between 2006 and 2016. He didn't have any real serious episodes between that time. And yes, he was medicated and the whole bit. But then from 2016 to current time, he's been on, and I only know this because my mom kept track of all of his hospitalizations. But when I wrote them down and then tallied time between, it was 10 months, 1 year and 7 months, 10 months, 1 year and 7 months, 10 months, 10 months, 1 year and 7 months. It was crazy.
That is crazy.
It's cyclical, but not seasonal. Like he says, he's more prone to it in the spring, and I agree. But he's been in the hospital over Christmas. It's not it's more like that. So anyways, I was telling someone that, and I just realized that we are on 1 year and 9 months between his last episode and today, which is the longest he's ever gone since 2016.
Wow.
So I was like, my gosh, knock on wood, that is so huge.
That is huge.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it, the reason I brought that up is because as a condition of his probation that he's unfortunately on, there's no drinking and no recreational use of other things.
Yeah.
And it really, he doesn't want to admit it, but it really does make a difference. Look at the proof is in that alone. He hasn't gone this long since 2016, and the variable that changed was that. So anyway,
That's huge.
it is. Yeah. So I hope that he can get to a place like Jeremy where it's not this denial, but acceptance that this really messes with me.
Yeah, for sure. I have a tickle in my throat.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. We'll get through it.
We will. And I can talk too if you need me to talk more.
Okay. The thing is, I'm gonna have to go change mid recording, because if I get hot, that just makes it worse. As you get hot, you're like coughing more. But anyway, so that's huge that you recognize that, and he will eventually, hopefully, see that and get there. And that, I think, ties really nicely with today's topic, which is boundary.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And how that conversation with Cody could eventually turn into a boundary that is created between the two of you. I will tell you that it's a marital deal breaker for me and Jeremy, drinking. He is not allowed to drink in the home. We are a alcohol, beer-free home. None in the house at all. Because in the past, access to alcohol made things so much worse. The only thing I can control is keeping what's in my home or out of my home, right? I cannot control, and nor do I want to control him and what he does outside of the home. But in order for us to maintain a healthy marriage, the boundary I created through what's called a marital deal breaker is no alcohol in the house. And it has made so much difference.
That's
so
awesome.
much difference. So we'll circle back to that in just a little bit. But like I said, we're going to talk about boundaries today. Yay for the boundary conversation. Right?
Oh my gosh, it's one of my most frequently asked questions. Or, when I say this especially comes into play with abusive situations during, particularly with manic episodes. And people will be like, well, I set a boundary, but he just blew right past it. And it's like, yep.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah. And so the hardest part, I think, is just, basically the consequence piece of blowing through a boundary. So it's likely that someone who is manic with their frontal lobe completely impaired is going to blow past a boundary, because they're also blowing past legal boundaries or, just
all
societal boundaries, all the boundaries. A person on my TikTok said, we are boundless. She experiences episodes, and she said that boundaries from her loved ones are actually helpful because she doesn't see the boundaries in a manic episode.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think when everyone's scared, like, oh, he'll be so mad at me if I set a boundary. And yes, at the time, they probably will. Yeah. But when they come out of the episode, they realize that the damage control was probably what helped them, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so you're talking about the enforcement and the consequence of the boundaries are probably the most important part. And I think to anybody who is in a relationship with somebody with this illness, to just back up a step and just tell you that this transition is what I'm going to call it, to having no boundaries is kind of tied to that chaos element of bipolar disorder, where you're not sure what's up or down. You've just been like jumping on the roller coaster, and then every so often just like getting ejected. Like, oh my gosh, we're back off the roller coaster. We're back on, right? You don't know where or when or how it's going to stop. So I want to say that boundaries, to me, are a way that we can love ourselves and someone else at the same time.
Yeah, I love that.
So it's a form of self-love, right? And you have to have some self-worth, like your value of yourself, your view of yourself has to exist in order for you to enforce a boundary to keep that relationship intact in a way that it is healthy for both of you. So loving yourself and someone else at the same time can happen with boundaries. Enforcement is hard, right? Creating boundaries is hard. Like, where do I start, right? And if you've been on this roller coaster ride for a while, I think that can be hard. Where do I even start? Like, I could put together a checklist and it would have 20 items, right, of things that I don't want to ever see happen again. But we got to pump the brakes a little bit.
Right,
prioritize. And I think a lot of these checklist items, for example, are sub items, I guess I'll call them, of like the topical item. So we have to figure out what those main boundaries are, and then the consequences up. So I think, or for me, it would be easy to be like, you know what? My boundary is you have to take your medication every day. Okay, great. Move on with life. Well, what happens if you don't take your medication? What does that look like?
Exactly.
That is something that is very common with people that have a bipolar diagnosis. Because eventually they get to the point where they're like, I don't need my medicine. I don't need my medicine. I don't need it. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the problem. It doesn't help. insert words, you've heard it before, right?
Yep.
So if you're there and you are creating the boundary of you have to take your medication every day, how would that go for you, Laura? What would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that boundaries are tough too because I have an understanding of the illness, which, we know that when they're in an active episode, just like you were mentioning with Jeremy being depressed, his judgment is impaired. So even though he knows that this is something that's not going to help him, he's just grasping at things to help him. And yes, you could put a hard and fast boundary and be like, you broke that rule, you're out of the house. But you understand that he only broke the rule because his brain is currently impaired.
Right.
And he understand, so there's like a fine line that you balance in understanding how to set these. And for me, absolutely, that is also one. Like for me, I don't call it take your meds every day. I say you have to commit to treatment, to active treatment. And as long as he's committed to being treated, which includes taking your meds every day, going to your psych, seeing your therapist, then if we do not take our meds one day or forget or get in a bad cycle, there's grace there because I just understand that it's probably because he's in an active episode, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure.
So,
and we're human.
And we're human.
We're gonna forget.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly. When I first started out on this journey, I was in a NAMI support group and a lot of the veterans in there were like, oh no, absolutely not. Like once and you're out. And a lot of them weren't with their partner anymore. And I was like, well, we're all human. Like I don't want to be held to a perfection expectation. And I don't even have a mental illness. Like
right.
I don't feel like it's fair to hold someone to a perfection boundaries. So when I talk about boundaries, they're there and I absolutely enforce them, but it's to when it's necessary to keep myself safe.
Sure.
And that might be financially, emotionally, not just physically, but yeah.
Shit.
So expletive. Are you okay over there?
I'm just knocking shit over. It's fine. It's all fine.
So I did a little boundaries tutorial on my TikTok the other day, and I was like, okay, you guys, let's start off small and then get progressively bigger. And so a small boundary might be they're yelling at you over the phone and calling you names or whatever, and no one should have to accept that. So a boundary would be, hey, I'm not going to talk to you until you can rein this in. Like I'm not going to be called names. Like we need, like if you want to talk to me, it needs to be in a respectful way. And yeah, most likely if they're manic, they're again going to blow right past that boundary. So then the consequence is if you continue to talk to me like this, I am hanging up. I am not having this conversation with you. And then of course you have to do it. And you keep doing it if they call back and like can't be respectful. So that's an easy one. But I feel like it gets harder when, you're living with them in that situation. Then what do you do?
Sure.
So, I mean, what do you think about that, Brooke?
So I'll just go back to the medication one. So one of my marital deal breakers with Jeremy is you have to take your medication every day and be in treatment. So because we went for years of him managing his medication and not taking it, but also it was the sole cause of his first attempt on his life.
Oh God.
So I had to rein that back in for myself to say, okay, how do I make this a situation where I can feel comfortable every day knowing that one, he's taking his medication, but he doesn't have access to all of it until he is in a better place, until he is more stable, et cetera. And that took like 2.5 years for me to feel comfortable letting him have access to all of his meds. Right. So what that did, the conversation about this marital deal breaker and boundary with medication, is it opened up the door to where he would tell me, hey, babe, I totally forgot to take my meds today. I'm wherever, and I'll take them as soon as I get home. It opened that line of communication to me where he was honest and he didn't have to hide it or lie about it because he wanted me to know because he didn't want the consequence to be bad. And if he was honest with me about it and all was well, like, okay, thanks for telling me. I so much appreciate that. No problem. I'm not going to say our marriage is over because you didn't take your medication after one day, but it did allow that conversation to start flowing more freely instead of it being like is he taking his meds? He's definitely not taking his meds. Let me go count the pills. How many times has anybody listening counted the pills in the bottle? Been there, done that. I got the degree, the certification. I'm probably a master's in it, right? So yes, that is part of it. But I think also the other part of this boundary is it's for me, right? It's for me to know that, like, he is safe. He has taken the recommended dose. He's doing what the doctors told him to do. He's not abusing his meds. So I feel more safe that I can see that he's taking what he's supposed to take. So I just wanted to clear that one up.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that also counting meds will drive you crazy. You're not here to be their mother or their nurse. And I think that I got that advice, like, thank God, from this amazing psychiatric nurse during his first hospitalization. And she was like, just remember that, you're his spouse, not his nurse, not his mother. Like, and if you're the one, yes, I have counted pills, so I'm not saying I haven't, but if that's what you're feeling like you have to do in order to keep your person safe, that, in my opinion, is at the expense of your mental health, because that'll drive a person nuts. Like, did they do it? Did they not? And not to mention, your spouse is not going to appreciate that. When Cody's found out I'm doing that, it's not like it goes over well.
Right.
Because you're not.
Thanks, pal.
Yeah. Right.
No, it's not going to go that way.
No. And so, like, that boundary for you is just a respectful thing between both of you. Like, hey, I want to be able to trust you. And, like, so this is going to be a marital deal breaker because I'm going to drive myself crazy worrying that you didn't take it. And I need that trust between us. So I'm not counting your pills. So I'm not trying to be your mom. So I don't feel like, I have to supervise you.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And if you have a spouse or a partner, your person that tends to lean more towards the depressive side, as a public service announcement, if you will, I take back all med responsibilities when he goes into depression.
That's good to know.
Even allow the risk to become a risk. I take all of that back. His meds are in the safe. I give him his morning meds and his evening meds. That's all he has access to.
That's good to know, Brooke. Thank you. Because a lot of people who message me really ask about that depressive side of bipolar. And with our story, Cody does not have a tendency. I think I've seen him depressed once, and it was a medication-induced apathetic depression. So, yeah, that's a real fear. And that's really good that you brought that up, because access to an unlimited medication would obviously pose a safety risk.
Yes. Yes, it does. And it helps me feel better about the situation at the same time, as much as I possibly can. But, that's just something that that I do because of our past. If you haven't been in that space before, it's a public service announcement. Don't take it lightly. If somebody is at that point in their life or that point mentally where they no longer want to be on this earth, we cannot stop them. We can do everything we can to try to help them not take that next step. But we cannot save them, no matter how hard we try, right? This is something I've learned twice now. So as a point of reference, like, if your person is in a depressive episode and talking about those things, it's time to get them help. Inpatient, hospitalization, take away those rights and responsibilities, because we literally, in my mind, I don't want to treat him like a child, but he has become a child in this moment because his brain is not working.
Yes.
His brain is not working as ours is working.
Right.
So, sorry, side note, that's what I've been dealing with for the last little while. So that's what's on my mind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I get asked that a lot. I send people to you. I'm like, I'm not the person to ask. Go ask this lady.
Good on her.
She will totally understand.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
But back to, what were we talking about?
Boundaries, yes.
Thank you. COVID brain. Okay.
I know, I feel so bad for you. So boundaries, yeah. I think I love this topic because people ask a lot, how do you deal with it? How do you cope? How do you cope with him verbally abusive? Or how do you cope with the manic spending? Or coping is about boundaries.
I don't think you can cope without them, really.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we could probably do a whole nother podcast on coping strategies through episodes. But boundaries is absolutely one of those coping strategies. And so, financially, you might have to freeze the credit. We personally have separate bank accounts, and we pay bills separately, and we do not have a joint account at all. So that's just what works for us.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, you might have to. I remember back in the day, people telling me cut up the credit cards when he did have access to my cards. And I was like, do you know how mad that's going to make him? It doesn't matter. Like, you're not dealing with a rational person.
Right,
When he
right.
comes out of it, he will understand why you cut up the credit cards and likely be thankful that he didn't max you out.
Yeah. And pause on that because that's really important, Laura. He may be thankful that you did that. And if he's not, I'm going to need you to take a pause and look at your
Yes,
relationship,
yes.
look at your marriage, and figure out, like, is this what I want? Right. And I'm not saying you should leave or not leave. I'm just saying that, like, a rational person with your best interests at heart would
Hmm.
see that situation for what it is and be like, wow, I could have drilled us into financial ruin. I am
Exactly.
so glad that you cut off my access to money,
Yes.
right? If it's the other way around, let's take a pause there. Are they still in the episode, number one? If so, pause. We're going to save that conversation for later,
Hmm.
right? But if they have come out of the episode, then my advice to you, dear listener, is woo, let's check in with yourself and make sure, like, this relationship, this partnership, this marriage, whatever the dynamic is beneficial to both parties.
Well, then I will get questions like, when I say that, I'll get questions like, well, what if they don't remember? And I was, I don't have experience with that because Cody has brain fog in the episode and coming out of it, but he always remembers. And if you don't remember, even if you don't remember in that situation, you have the proof in the pudding, in the
Mm-hmm.
statements,
Yeah.
okay, or whatever they bought.
Yep.
So you can still say, well, maybe you don't remember, but this is still what happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that ties back into a couple of questions that I've gotten about accountability within the episode. Like, yeah, I put all
Yes.
these boundaries in place and they don't remember. Or how do you hold them accountable even after the boundaries have been in place and they're mad, they're angry, they don't remember? How do you do that? And I think that's a multifaceted,
It is.
sort of complex conversation that isn't easy to navigate because we're human and we want to have a conversation with our partner or person where there's empathy, sympathy, understanding, logic within that conversation. But if there's a gap or something missing in that conversation, then it feels like you're not heard and you're not going to be validated.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to have that conversation where you're hurt and you want your feelings to be validated.
Mhm.
But to tie back to what you just said, it's, you don't have to have proof. You don't have to give them physical proof or play a video to say this is what happened. The proof is, I love you. You need to know these are the things that happened during this episode. These were the hurts. This was the outcome. And I need you to understand, like, this is how I'm feeling from this. And we need to make sure we're doing whatever we can so it doesn't happen again.
That's a good point, Brooke. Yeah,
Not that
that's
the
a good
episode
point.
isn't going to happen again, but that these actions aren't going to happen again, right? And
Yeah.
we can't also say that these actions aren't going to happen again because they typically will, but at least you'll be better prepared to protect yourself should and if/when that happens, right?
Yeah. One boundary I have, and we've gone rounds with it, is that when he gets to the point where he's wildly manic, I'm not talking like hypomanic, but it's moved into manic and he always gets psychosis in his mania episode. So when it hits that point, everything is so chaotic and crazy. I mean, I hate to use that word, but it honestly is. And I don't want my kids exposed to that. I mean, the fast talking, the odd behavior, I mean, that's not really traumatizing them, but seeing him smash a thermostat because it's staring at him or spying on it, no, like my kids, I'm not doing that.
Right.
And so I always pull us out of the house and we go somewhere else. Except this last time I decided to go a protection order route and I'm not sure which one was better, to be honest with you. I think I'll probably just leave again. But yeah, there's always going to be a point where we're physically separated from him. And he's told me before that that doesn't help him, that makes it worse. And I do believe he's right. I do believe it does make his manic and manic psychotic episode worse in the sense that he spirals because now he's worrying about us. But I'm sorry, I can't. I have to pull us out of that situation, and I always do.
Yeah, I can hear the hurt in that statement because you're like, I know this is making it worse. But also, we can't stay
Yeah, and we're not making it better either.
No.
Staying is not making it better. So, yeah.
And we have to protect the kids and ourselves and him
Yes.
and our person, right? And
Yes.
there's no great, easy way to do it. But yeah, I would fully agree with you that like removing you all from the situation is what's best.
Yeah, because I get accused a lot on TikTok too of like you're traumatizing your children by staying, having them raised by a person with bipolar is traumatizing, and it's not. Like you guys, I just they can get nasty.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from a place of personal experience. I think a lot of people do have PTSD from a bipolar parent, and a lot of times that bipolar parent wasn't medicated. They might have been enabled by the other spouse. There could have been a lot of stuff going on, but in a stable home where the person is actively committed to treatment that has bipolar, Cody is a great dad.
Yeah.
I mean, like I just said at the start of this podcast, we've gone a year and 9 months. Had I divorced him in this last one, that's a year and 9 months my kids lost with the great experiences we've had as a family during that whole time. And no, like he's a great dad. And so just having bipolar in and of itself doesn't make you a bad person. Having bipolar in and of itself doesn't make you traumatized children.
Right. Absolutely not. Oh, I won't jump on that soapbox. Just to say that like uneducated people are also toxic and traumatizing. Period. That's a hard line for me. But all things considered, yeah, like we're all just trying to do our best, right?
Yeah.
Like we are all just trying to get through our day, make the best choices we can for all involved with the information and knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
Taking this step of listening to this podcast or educating yourself on other social media platforms or books or whatever the case may be, like you are also just doing your best, and learning is only going to help you.
I think that setting boundaries with someone who has bipolar disorder is counterintuitive because with every other illness that you might be going through, like Cody, also has diabetes and he had a diabetic incident where we had to go to the hospital. I mean, the response is not to set a boundary and leave.
Right.
So like, and with any other illness, of course I'm going to be there. I'm going to be right by his side. You're going to be bringing him stuff. You're going to be loving them physically through it with them by their side. But unfortunately, the way that manic episodes in particular are, in my situation, you can't love them in the traditional way I would love him through a diabetic incident. Because it's so chaotic and the damage that a manic episode can do is astronomical. It's sometimes unbelievable. The damage that it can cause. I mean, and so, yes, it's counterintuitive to be like, well, I need to stay and help them through it. But as I mentioned before, staying doesn't help him either. If he's there, he's there. What helps him is a hospitalization, and he's not going to check himself in. Well, now he will, and in the early days, he wasn't going to check himself into the hospital, and they aren't going to take him in unless he's a threat to himself or others. So what am I going to do? Sit in a chaotic environment and max my mental health out? No, I have to function. I'm a mom. I have a job. I have to run the household. I have to make sure the kids are still getting to their events and school. And so, if you are listening, just like you said, dear listener, this a counterintuitive way to love someone through a manic episode. But I have a friend on TikTok who said it best. She's like, we love them through it, through the use of boundaries. And I say that all the time because it's so true.
It is so true. Yes, indeed. And just know that like, if you haven't set any boundaries and you are starting to set these boundaries, we've been there. And I can tell you the first time I set a boundary, I'm pretty sure my toes were sweaty. Like there wasn't an inch of me that was dry. Okay. Like I was profusely sweating because I was terrified of how he was going to respond.
That's so true.
But you have to recognize that these boundaries cannot be set during an episode. Your person needs to be stable. They have to be stable.
That's a good point.
When you're having these conversations, and you need to come to them, in a neutral environment where it feels not one-sided or I guess what I'm getting at is don't start this conversation off with, we need to talk. I wouldn't recommend that one.
I would not recommend that either.
0 out of 10. It could be something more like, hey, I've been thinking about some things lately and I'd really like to get your thoughts on, and I mean in the moment, like, can we go outside in the sun or wherever, is comfortable in your space, your combined space, not one or the other, just to be like, I really want to get your thoughts and kind of talk through some things I've been thinking about that I really think will be beneficial for us and our relationship moving forward. And then just dive right into it. Don't give pregnant pauses. Don't, hold it over their head like, oh my God, you're leaving me. No, that's not what I'm saying. Don't give yourself that space for them to get super worked up, because I promise you they will. People with this specific diagnosis tend to have also really high anxiety at times, and sometimes abandonment issues because of these episodes and the disaster that has come from mania specifically, right? I mean, also depression. But anyway, point being, set yourself up for success by having a plan. Take a piece of paper in there with you. That's totally fine. Let them judge you. If you think he's going to judge you, he, she, whoever, let them. Get out your thoughts when your person is stable and have a, respectful conversation about the boundaries. But also know this, your boundaries are yours. Your person does not have to agree with them, but they do need and have to respect them for them to work for you. Would
Yeah,
you agree?
exactly. Yes, just like I said with the manic psychotic, stage of his episodes, I understand that it makes you worse, and I honestly acknowledge it makes you worse, but I can't make you better, and we don't want our kids exposed to that. That's just the bottom line. So,
Yep.
Yeah, so I would agree with that.
Yep. And again, you can start off small and you can leave that like open-ended, not to say like, I'm going to come up with all these rules. Boundaries aren't intended to be seen as control over the relationship or the person. I think if you like present it in that light, then it's not going to be received or respected.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, well, what's the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? All you're doing is just setting ultimatums that he has to follow. And I think that was actually a hard thing for me to wrap my head around when I was first learning boundaries, because I mean, yes, like ultimately they're not compliant with your boundaries. Yes, it is an ultimatum, but it's not a threat. It's to keep yourself safe. And if they can't respect your boundaries to keep you or your children or your family safe, well then yes, the ultimate, I guess the boundary does become an ultimatum then, but it's not a way to control them. And that was very confusing to me at first.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think what we could say is an ultimatum is right here, right now. If you don't do this, I'm leaving. Like today, right now, in this moment.
Yeah.
And because we're having these conversations about boundaries set up in a time where your person is stable, it is, okay, I need you to be willing to hand me your debit card and credit card at the first sign of a manic episode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We're not manic right now, so I'm not saying give me your debit card or your credit card, right? And if you don't do those things, then I will shut off your access to funds electronically. Like, I want to give him the opportunity to hand over his access to funds, right? To acknowledge, yes, I am moving into mania. Here is my debit, credit card, whatever. I know this is what we agreed on. You may not like it, but he, she can do that, right? Not always, but sometimes they can. I want to give my person the ability to remain independent as long as I possibly can, so that we're preventing the chaos. It's not an in the moment ultimatum where if you don't do this, I'm leaving. It's, hey, we're going to set up these things for the future to hopefully mitigate all of the chaos and destruction, well, as much as we possibly can. I think one thing I've learned in talking about bipolar disorder, whether it's on TikTok or here, is I have to be very careful about saying always, never. We have to be very mindful of that, because we, as the spouse, we can latch on to things when we feel like we don't have much hope, right? And if I'm over here saying we can prevent these things from happening in the future, it's like, oh, we can prevent them from happening. Not always. Like we can kind of work our way there. We can do whatever we can to set ourselves up for success, but I don't want to give listeners false pretenses to when I'm saying things like that, because I don't mean always and never. Just want to lay that out there.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so I had a thought and it like left my brain when you were talking about the thought before your last one.
I gave you total brain.
Darn it! I hate it when that happens.
I know.
Oh, I know what it
ADHD.
was. Cody also has boundaries for me, by the way.
Perfect. I love this.
And so for me, I had a tendency to be like, you're going manic. And he was like, that is the number one way to shoot me even further into it, just so you know. And he said this not when he was manic.
Gotcha.
And I believe him because it honestly didn't help telling him he was manic, and it didn't make 1 ounce of a difference in the trajectory of it. So I do not say that anymore. So now I call a psychiatrist, I let them know, and that has never helped either. Nothing has helped curb the mania once it's here, unfortunately for us. So yeah, but so there's been things like that, or what are some other ones he has with me? I mean, it can feel very one-sided when the spouse is like, well, these are my boundaries, blah, 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 and that he has no say in things that maybe he didn't appreciate that was happening with me as well. And like I said, that was one of them. He's like, it makes it worse when you leave. And I'm like, that's gotta be, no, it's a deal breaker for me. I gotta go. I cannot stay.
Yeah.
And I will say too that Cody would not be capable of having a long conversation with multiple boundaries listed. He's just, as you said, like he's gonna immediately get worked up no matter how fast I present it. So these conversations with us took place very random when it just made sense for it to come up. Like maybe he mentioned something he did in a manic episode, and then I was like, yeah, hey, just so you know, this is a boundary I have around that. Or this last time, there was so many problems that happened in this last episode that I knew he wasn't going to be capable of sitting through a conversation of everything I needed to say without professional help. So I was like, as a condition of us moving back in together, because unfortunately we were not living together during that episode, I was like, it was really bad. I was like, you have got to go to counseling with me, marital counseling. And it was very hard. He was extremely defensive. He didn't hear half the stuff I was saying. The counselor was like, I didn't hear her say that, or I don't think that's what she's saying. And it's really hard. And all he heard was, you hate me, you hate me, you hate me, you hate me. And that's not what I was saying, but he was interpreting that way. So yeah, like you might consider even just a third party to help you if these conversations are not going well.
Yeah. Great point. I mean, you know your person better than we do.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We can just tell you what's worked for us. And I'm not even going to sit here and say that my conversation with him about my boundaries went fantastic, even though I had a list. But I will tell you that was a condition. I created our marital deal breaker boundaries when we got back together after we had separated after a manic episode, and he told me he wanted a divorce, yada, yada, yada. I mean, literally check the box because a lot of people have been where I was.
Oh, yes. People ask me all the time, too. Like, does he ever threaten divorce during a manic episode? I'm like, all the time. I mean,
it's part of his everyday sentence. Like, every other word becomes divorce, 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 divorce.
Yes. And people ask me, too, well, why are we the bad guy? Like, why does there have to be a bad guy? Why am I the enemy? And I think the only thing I have to say, and this is just purely speculation on my point, is that because they don't realize they're the problem, because they're in an active episode, someone has to be the problem. Someone has to be sowing the chaos and causing all of these issues. And because it's not them, it must be us in their mind. And then, of course, when he comes out of it, he fully recognizes that it was an episode. But yeah.
I feel like mania wants the closest person, the targeted person, to feel how it is feeling, but worse. And if you are in their line of sight, you become the bad person. You become the person that they latch onto. However, I think there's also a different side of that would be like kids. I haven't experienced it where my husband doesn't attack our kids. So
that's true.
Nothing.
Same.
It is usually like the person that they feel safest with when they are stable is who they attack when they are in an episode. I don't know the mental gymnastics that happens because of that, but if it's not us, it could be a parent. It's like the next person in the pecking order, or their best friend, and they'll blow those relationships up. And I feel like that's something that we should mention. That's what I've experienced. If I shut down that bipolar conversation and I don't allow him to get out those feelings, mania doesn't go anywhere with me. I literally just have a shield. It's what it feels like. I just have a shield and it's bouncing off of me. He will get pissed and irate but he will go move on to the next target kind of situation. So I have to like send a message to my in-laws and be like, hey, just a heads up, Jeremy is manic and he is hell bent that I am taking him all of his money, yada, 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 yada. He's going to ask you for money. Please, for the love of all that is holy, do not give him money because that will only make things worse.
Yeah.
And I think they finally understand that. And I know that's hard from their perspective too. They're like, oh, my brother, my son, he just wants a Happy Meal. No, he freaking doesn't. He doesn't want a freaking Happy Meal. All right. He wants something that's a lot more than a Happy Meal.
To put it lightly.
Please. And if you want to get him a Happy Meal, go buy him a Happy Meal. Okay, give him the Happy Meal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So just, I don't know, another public service announcement that just hit me that like, yeah, we become the bad person, but it doesn't end with us.
Yeah.
If we deflect and we cut that off, we're not adding fuel to the fire. That fire is going to be directed elsewhere until he has no other they have no other outlet. But then that can become very dangerous. They become more of a threat to themselves. So we have to just be kind of really mindful of that.
Yes.
We've covered a lot today.
And if you're wondering what the bipolar conversation is, that was in our, I think, episode 2.
Yes.
We covered the bipolar conversation. So check that out if you are interested in knowing what we're talking about there.
Yes. And if you have specific questions, dear listeners, about boundaries and maybe how to start that conversation, even more so, if you want more specific information, don't forget we are on TikTok. You can reach us via direct message on there. Of course, you can leave a comment within the podcast. You can, send a carrier pigeon, whatever it is that works for you. It's fine. We'll be here.
Yeah, I definitely answer DMs too on my TikTok, the BP spouse, and that is a very common question.
Yes, agreed. And ours is at break_the stigma. Let's see, Laura, is there anything you want to leave our listeners with on the topic of boundaries?
Yeah, I want to leave them with that, my favorite quote from my friend that I already mentioned, but it is that loving someone with bipolar might look different, and that's okay, but we love them through the use of boundaries. We can still love them through an episode, but as you mentioned, love ourselves as well through the use of boundaries.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And in baby steps, right? I think we can approach loving our person that has this illness with baby steps, no matter which angle we're looking at it or what it is we have to do. Like small steps, we'll get there. And be confident because, again, these boundaries are there to protect you, to keep you safe, but also let you love yourself and them at the same time.
Love that. Awesome, Brooke. Always good to talk to you.
You too. And of course, all of our episodes are going to be dropping every other week on pretty much all podcast platforms. So I think that's all for today.
Sounds great, Brooke.
All right. See you next time.
See you.